Chancellor. I've been teaching science since 1957, and one of the most important concepts that I've covered during that time has been that of the oxygen-carbon dioxide cycle. I find that many people don't understand the significance of the oxygen-carbon dioxide cycle to the survival of the human species, so I'd like to give you a few facts about it. Please keep in mind that I'm generalizing for a general audience, so if any of you is a biochemist, you might want to challenge some of my statements. Almost all high school biology books have a diagram that looks like this. It's called the oxygen-carbon dioxide cycle. Oxygen is at the top, carbon dioxide is at the bottom, and the book explains that oxygen is combined with carbon in part of the cycle to form carbon dioxide, and in the other part of the cycle, the oxygen is freed from the carbon dioxide. It's important to know that the only organisms that can produce pure oxygen are green plants. But all living cells produce carbon dioxide. We can examine the details of this cycle by looking at the two chemical reactions that are the main ones in the makeup of the oxygen-carbon dioxide cycle. They are photosynthesis and cellular respiration. The word photosynthesis comes from two Greek words, photo meaning light and synthesis meaning putting together. And in the process of photosynthesis, green plants take carbon dioxide out of the air, water out of the soil, and from those two substances, the green plants produce glucose, which has the formula C6H12O6, and pure oxygen. They can only do that because they contain chlorophyll, which is the pigment that makes them green. But the chlorophyll is only active when the light is shining on it. There's no energy in carbon dioxide and no energy in water, but there is energy in glucose. And that energy comes from the light shining on the chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is the only substance that can transform light energy into food energy, so that makes it very important to us. The other part of the oxygen-carbon dioxide cycle is cellular respiration. And that's going on in all of your cells right now. During cellular respiration, our cells take in glucose, C6H12O6, and oxygen, and in the process they produce carbon dioxide, water, and the energy that was stored in the glucose is released for the cellular activities. That energy is very important to the cells. Without that energy, your brain cells couldn't send messages, your heart cells couldn't pump, none of your cellular activities could occur. So that makes cellular respiration very important to us. We don't eat much pure glucose. The main form of pure glucose that we consume is in honey, which is about 31% glucose. But most of our glucose for our cellular activities comes from the carbohydrates, proteins, and fats that we digest. I refer to this set of equations as the balance of life because essentially they should be balanced. Ideally, the oxygen producers, the plants, would be producing all of the oxygen that we need. But we have been upsetting that balance significantly in the last 100 years or so by destroying plants, thousands of acres a day, by burning jungles to clear land, by paving over green areas to make parking lots and developments, by logging. But at the same time, we've been increasing the number of oxygen consumers by the large increase in the human population. So what's happening is that the oxygen producers are decreasing, but the oxygen consumers are increasing. Well, that can't go on forever. It's like money in the bank. If you take out more than you put in, you're going to eventually run out. Now, our generation probably won't notice any decline in the oxygen concentration of the atmosphere, because the atmosphere is 63 miles deep, it's 21% oxygen, and it covers the entire Earth. So that's a big reservoir of oxygen. But our grandchildren's generation or our great-grandchildren's generation might notice a decline in the oxygen. If you're only concerned about your own generation, there's no reason to be concerned about this imbalance that we're creating. But if you're concerned about your grandchildren's generation or your great-grandchildren's generation, there is a reason to be concerned. Most green plants make more glucose than they need for their own activities. And they store it in various forms. Plants like wheat, rice, corn, and potatoes stored in the form of carbohydrates, which is mainly starch. Legume plants like peas and beans store a lot of their excess glucose in the form of proteins. And plants like the safflower, the canola plant, the olive tree, and the cotton plant store a lot of their excess glucose in the form of fats or vegetable oils. We eat these foods, and our digestive system proceeds to break them down into glucose. Carbohydrates are essentially long chains of glucose molecules linked together end to end. Proteins are essentially long chains of glucose molecules linked end to end with some nitrogen and sulfur added, and fats are essentially long chains of glucose molecules linked end to end with some extra oxygen added. The digestion of the starch, which is the main carbohydrate that we consume, starts in the mouth. If you've ever chewed a piece of bread or a soda cracker for a long time, you probably noticed that it started to taste sweet. That's because the starch in the bread is changed to glucose in the mouth by the action of the saliva. Starch is not sweet, but glucose is. The digestion of proteins and fats doesn't start until they reach the stomach. But by the time all the carbohydrates, proteins, and fats have reached the lower end of the small intestine, they should have been converted to glucose. The small intestine has a very rich blood supply that carries that glucose to all the cells of the body, and the same blood supply also carries oxygen from the lungs to all the cells of the body. So this reaction, cellular respiration, is going on in all of your cells, fueled by that glucose and the oxygen from your lungs. So I'll write this equation again. We form carbon dioxide, water, and the energy is released. Energy from the glucose. This is like a little fire burning in all of your cells. Most of you know that if you heat wood high enough, it starts to burn. And as it burns, it gives off carbon dioxide and water and energy in the form of heat and light. That's because wood is basically cellulose, and cellulose is essentially long chains of glucose molecules linked end to end, but they're so firmly linked and the chains are so long that our digestive systems can't digest cellulose. But there are some organisms that can digest it, and they include some funguses and bacteria, and some of those are found in the intestines of termites and beavers, and that's why termites and beavers can digest wood. The main component of wood and straw is cellulose. Cellulose is essentially long chains of glucose molecules held end to end. Scientists have recently discovered how to convert cellulose into glucose, but only on a small laboratory basis. If we could ever learn how to convert cellulose into glucose on a mass basis that was feasible, financially feasible, we would really be able to solve all of the world's food energy problems. So to sum it up, the oxygen carbon dioxide cycle is very important to us because the oxygen producers are producing the oxygen we need. But what we have to realize is that if we destroy the oxygen producers, we're going to be eliminating the oxygen consumers eventually too. Now there's a flip side to this problem of oxygen depletion, and that's the increase in the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We hear a lot about global warming on news reports these days. We see a lot of pictures of smokestacks belching smoke full of carbon dioxide, automobile traffic jams giving off carbon dioxide in their exhaust. What we hardly ever hear is the fact that there are 6.7 billion people in the world giving off carbon dioxide continuously. And that should give you something to think about.